I loved watching you communicate constantly with Everton fans.
There was some really robust conversation. Capacity was an issue. Why not have one more seat than Anfield? Every one of those debates happened all the time.
How do you go about replacing a stadium that's been a centre point of community like Goodison Park, built in 1892? A place that's seen titles won, bangers scored, a place where I've laughed, a place where I've cried many times, a place where I've broken my glasses celebrating that James Tarkowski last-minute goal of wonder in the 2-2 win in the last Merseyside derby there. How do you go about designing, planning, and then building the replacement? Because football clubs are not like homes, where you can move the family into a suburban new build seamlessly. There's community, there's memory, there's identity. Get it wrong, and you can sterilise the whole city. Spoiler alert, we've already seen such heady heights at Everton's new stadium, the Hill Dickinson. The Renaissance is in full swing. And so in this episode, it's a joy to welcome the architectural genius who had the vision and then made it real over a 10-year journey to build this new home with its stunning steep terraces, 100% sustainable energy, and the 747 toilets, to tell the story about how an enormous piece of design could become a reality against the odds to transform the club and the city. It's a joy to welcome the American architect who envisioned it, a gentleman who's been on an epic 10-year creative journey in which he's picked up not only an Everton tattoo, but also an Everton license plate, I believe. It's an incredible honour to be with the visionary, Mr. Dan Meis.
Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Dan, it's incredible to be with you, not just to hear about your vision made real, but it's also incredible times for Everton Football Club. The Jack Naissance, the Grealish Naissance, those tiny shin pads, a blur of wonder. As we sit here, I swear this happened, historians. Everton are in 5th place in the Premier League. How does it feel as an American to know that you've had the long-lasting impact on the Premier League in a way few Americans have other than Clint Dempsey?
It's pretty incredible. It really is. It's been a big honor. It's been a long journey. I looked at an early sketch. It's been 10 years, but yet it still feels kind of magical to go there. I mean, I remember doing the sketch and I've seen it coming up. To see it built, it feels like it just kind of appeared.
Are you serious? That's like, most people are like, it's been 10 years, feels like 100. To you, does this experience really feel like 1 minute I'm drawing, the next minute I'm walking out at the Hill Dickinson, it's packed with fans, Everton are winning?
It really does feel that way. I know it sounds a little absurd, but because it took, the work of thousands of people to make it happen and 10 years. But when you see it there, it just feels like it kind of just appeared.
I'm not an elite psychologist, but I do know there's something called repression. So this is almost like, I guess, kind of a Everton Football Club trauma therapy. We're going to dive in, unpack those 10 years. Let's start right at the beginning, because you're a fascinating human being. Scouse accent is not there, because you're from Windsor, Colorado, which is population.
It was 3,000 when I lived there, tiny little town.
So how does a kid growing up in a town of 3,000, or is it because a kid grew up in a town of 3,000 that you decided to dedicate your life to building stadia where 50, 60, 70,000 people can come together and commune? How did that happen?
No, it wasn't really planned. When I was small, my parents owned the corner bakery, and when the town built a new high school, the architects displayed the model because everybody would come to the bakery in the morning. So I would go in and look at this model and take off the roof, and I thought, wow, somebody gets paid to do this, That seems like a cool job.
Make tiny models.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I didn't know. I just thought architects built houses and that I would someday end up in Aspen. That was my aspiration, to design houses and have a horse.
Like you're home off to live in Aspen and have a horse. But you did dive in. That pivot to being a sports architect happened when? How?
Well, so I went to Chicago for school, and I worked in a well-known architect's office there who did skyscrapers all over the world and exposed me to big architecture. And one day I had a friend say, hey, I don't know if you'd ever live in Kansas City, but there are these firms that specialize in stadiums. And it seemed like a cool building type. And I had dated a girl from Kansas City, and I thought, well, I'll give that a shot.
Stadiums, a girl, barbecue, I'm in. And the journey began. You start off designing stadia, ballparks in the United States, Philadelphia Eagles, Seattle Seahawks, Milwaukee Brewers, amongst others. You delved into AS Roma and the idea of a new stadium. And then a business associate asked you if you go to Liverpool take a meeting with Everton Football Club. I think Everton's then CEO was Robert Elstone, right?
Yeah.
What did you know about Everton when you got on that plane? And how did that meeting go?
Yeah, the only thing I knew about Everton, really, I mean, I knew Premier League clubs, but Everton, my son had been a huge FIFA video game fan, obviously, and he was a big fan of Lukaku, and I was really fascinated by Lukaku. He was such a big guy and yet was so fast, and so that's what really got me watching them. But when this colleague of mine said, "Hey, if I can get you a meeting with Everton, would you take it?" I said, they're not going to hire an architect from Los Angeles. That makes no sense. I mean, to me, it seemed like a pretty parochial place, and the idea that they would hire an architect from the United States, let alone Los Angeles, just didn't make sense. But he got me the meeting. I got on a flight, and then everything went wrong. My plane was late to Heathrow, so I missed my first train, and then I got on the next train, and that train stopped halfway to Liverpool, which I learned is something that happens.
Welcome to England. They schedule the breakdown. When you get on the 10:22, we'll break down at 11:17. You're like, great.
Yeah. And this is a true story. I literally thought pretty hard about just crossing the platform and going home because I thought this is a waste of time. But it found out that Robert was, in fact, waiting for me. And I went, and it was great. He helped me with my bags up into the office, and in probably, I don't know, half-hour meeting, the light bulb kind of went off for me because he talked about who Everton was and how, we're not London. We're not a fancy club. We don't need all the shiny bells and whistles. We need a proper football stadium. And that got me thinking about the tradition of English football and how these buildings grew up. And I was always fascinated by that because I thought a lot of the new buildings in the UK were feeling more like NFL buildings, and it seemed like it was losing the charm and what made English football really unique. A lot like baseball stadiums, interestingly, where you start with a pitch and a stand, and then as the club grows, they grow up kind of quirky. You add a stand here, a different architect comes and adds this stand, and that's what really created the sort of charm of early baseball stadiums, and the same thing with English football. So that was my angle. That was the light bulb that kind of went off for me in that first meeting.
Character, idiosyncrasy, a singularity. I want to pick up on that learning journey, but what you just said, there is a true power to that you almost feel like, I'm out. The universe was almost conspiring to you. Because I do believe, watching football a lot, if there is a God, she may be a red. It may have been, the plane late, the train late, but still you persevered. Do you ever think, like, if you had crossed that track?
Oh, it's crazy. Well, my wife tells me all the time, like, when I say, I don't want to go to this meeting, this project will never happen. Of course, those are the ones that end up happening.
I never want to work with Roger Bennett. Thank you, wife, for making him do this. Biggest mistake of his life. But that learning journey, when you plummet in, you leave the Robert Elstone meeting, there's something about it, the challenge that he gave you to build something with character, with culture, with a locality that had a global quality, but a true authenticity that spoke of Everton. What learning journey do you go on to plumb through the layers of time and the evolution of football stadium? What do you look at? How do you do it? What archives are you delving into?
Yeah.
Where's the inspirations?
I mean, I literally did everything from, buying every book on English football grounds I could find. I was on eBay looking for vintage Everton stuff, tickets and programs and old jerseys. And I mean, we really did immerse ourselves in that history because I believe that was going to be my superpower, that I was coming as American. I wasn't taking anything for granted. And I felt like what was happening in architecture around football stadiums in the UK was everybody was trying to be international and more like the NFL and really losing a lot of the magic of a place like Goodison, which, I felt that from the very first time I was there.
But what about the city of Liverpool? I'm so proud to be from there. It is different. It does think differently. When I grew up, there was a talk politically of it ceding from the rest of England and becoming a principality. It does feel like a magical kingdom. What spoke to you about that place in general and Everton Football Club and its tradition in particular?
Well, as an American, obviously, Liverpool, you think about the Beatles and the history that everybody sort of knows. But spending time there, I got to know a lot about the architectural history. And, we didn't know about Bramley-Moore at the beginning. The dock it was actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site at the time when we first started. But when we were first talking to Everton, the site wasn't really clear. It was later that we got the focus of Bramley-Moore Dock and this incredible history of the shipbuilding and all of that of Liverpool.
You definitely got Everton incredibly quickly. You tweeted, watching Everton games gave you, quote, that same feeling I get when deciding to ride a roller coaster. But at the top of that first hill, I think, F. And I'm paraphrasing, why did I do this again?
Yeah, very true. And, you know, even though I've worked on lots of incredible projects, there was something about that being an Evertonian that really soaked in so quickly. And I became a fan at the same time I was chasing the project. So that was an interesting experience.
Where's your tattoo, by the way?
It's right here. Yeah, 1878.
With this put on at the Robert Elstone meeting, was that how you closed
No,
the deal?
no.
You just grabbed
you just
grabbed the compass off his desk and said, this is how much I want to give myself to the club.
It was after that first year of watching the team, I think, and engaging with fans on Twitter. And I knew that like this was going to be in my blood one way or another, no matter where the project went. So it was a commitment.
So you committed emotionally, you committed intellectually, you delved into the stadia. I mean, you are a sports fan as well as an architect. You've talked a lot, quite beautifully, about how you really do appreciate the heritage of old stadia, stately old homes almost, where memories have been forged for generations. Places like Boston's Fenway Park, Chicago's Wrigley Field. I think they opened in 1912, 1914. Fulham's Craven Cottage, I know, is something that's inspired you. Also designed like Goodison Park by the great architect Archibald Leach. Talk about the stadia journey that you went on as you looked at design, as you looked at early ideas for atmosphere, and how you thought about building something that's both timeless and rooted in the past, but it also speaks of the future, a bold future.
Yeah, well, this was the interesting twist in the story that Bill Kenwright played a big role in.
The iconic late Everton
chairman. Yeah, and for those that have never met him, he was about as passionate a fan as anyone has ever seen of Everton. But I hadn't spoken to him yet. I'd only had my meetings with Robert as I was doing all of this thinking about traditional English football. And so I did some sketches that really looked like some of those historic grounds, you know, exposed trusses and different stands had different character to them. And it almost looked like different architects might have put it together, but in a very, modern stadium kind of way. But it definitely had a kind of traditional English football look. So when I met Bill Kenwright for the first time, and I ran through everything that I've just talked about and how important this is, the history and all that, and he said, yeah, I get that, but that's not what we want. You know, it should draw on that history, but it has to be future thinking. And so I thought I was dead in the water, actually.
By the way, did that rock you?
Oh, yeah, because I thought...
What did you do in that, man? Did you like nod knowingly, and then on the inside you're like, oh, my floor is just the floor.
Yeah, I really did. I thought, okay, I thought I was very clever about this and being so passionate about it, and he kind of shot it down pretty quickly. But he was intrigued. You know, he was a theater guy, and so I think the LA connection was interesting to him. I think the idea... He was always great at bringing talent together in his shows and his passion for the club. So I think he saw me as a bit of a disruptor in that way from the usual suspects. And it gave me a challenge to, okay, can we keep this sense of history, but really look to something more forward thinking? And at that point, we were now looking at Bramley-Moore. So we had the whole history of the docks and the UNESCO World Heritage history and all of that to now draw those ideas together.
What a canvas. Also, what a raw source of inspiration you had in Goodison Park. I mean, this is fascinating to me. When Goodison Park opened in 1892, local newspaper, the Athletic News, wrote that, quote, they've not put down a running track around the ground, being of opinion the nearer you can get your spectators to the play, the more your spectators will appreciate it. And by that, I think they meant wanker signs. Keeping the crowd close to the pitch, that bear pit that Goodison was, it was such an intimidating and singular place to play. It's so hard to talk about it in the past tense. Even as I say that, it makes my heart constrict. But what was your architect's experience of going to Goodison Park for the first time, that grand old home, both as an architect and an Everton supporter?
Yeah, well, it was all of those things and more. You know, there are a few places in sports history, I think, that are almost like a religious experience. You mentioned Fenway or Wrigley, and Madison Square Garden even has it. Even though it's, not a particularly pretty architecture, there's something about the history of a place that, you feel different when you're there. And I got that instantly when I walked into Goodison. The first time I was there, I was in a box, so I didn't get the full experience. The second time I sat behind a column.
You rip your shirt off. They're like, we don't do that here, Dan.
No. But the other thing that struck me on that very first game was how many families were there and kids, and not something I expected, having worked on Roma and, seen some of the really hardcore fan clubs. You didn't see a lot of kids in those buildings. So that I knew was something special too, that this was a multi-generational passion. So there was a lot of inspiration to come out of that.
Was Goodison intimidating to you? They say never follow kids or animals or whatever. Like, how do you follow Goodison Park? You're like, this is so raw, so pure. You're talking about creating something singular. That was the most singular place in the modern football realm.
Yeah.
You're almost like, how do I follow that? It's like trying to act after De Niro's just left the stage.
Yeah. Well, and I had some recent experience of seeing what had happened with clubs like Arsenal and West Ham in particular, leaving a traditional building to something that was sure big and shiny, but lost a lot of character, obviously. And the fans really suffered from it and still are. So I was intimidated by that. But it was so clear that the driver was, we had to start with the steepest stands right on top of the pitch, and everything else would kind of fall into place.
Whose idea was that?
Well, I don't know. I think it was a collective idea. Again, part of it was because I knew we couldn't stray very far from Goodison. And so we thought, well, if we can stay this close and get steeper because it's going to be taller, even though you might be sitting further away, if you're steeper, you feel like you're closer. You're right on top of it. The other thing, by that time, I was a rabid fan, and I recognized how much the play on the pitch changes based on how the fans interact with them. The players react to the stadium. They really do. And
the Everton fume.
So if the fans are with them, the players are going to play better. And it's a chicken and egg. They really do respond to each other.
What's it like for you? You've been to now Liverpool dozens of times, but you are designing in Los Angeles. What's it like when you're in creative mode, dreaming about a stadium being built thousands of miles away from you? You're physically in LA, mentally, creatively on the banks of the River Mersey.
Yeah, it's funny, our process, and this is, I have a lot of great people that work with me that have really engaged in this too. I create a sort of war room-like atmosphere in my offices with lots of imagery and historical photos, books, and the memorabilia and the things I was talking about before. I kind of surround myself. So while I'm working on a project, I'm very immersed in whatever that place is, which makes it hard for me to do more than one project at a time. So it's a pro and a con, but clearly that was a big part of why this design became what it was.
It's been no straight line. The 10 years have been, for your project, for Everton Football Club, for every single Everton fan, I mean, just an utterly agonizing, epic, emotional journey. You bound up your first series of designs in a royal blue book, made to look like one of Archibald Leach's signature crisscross railings that covered the beautiful Bullens Road at Goodison Park. You presented it proudly. You put your heart, your soul, your whole team into this. As you say, the late Bill Kenwright turned around and said, I hate it. What do you do with doubt in those moments? How do you regroup? I mean, how do you not just doubt everything that you put into this project in a moment like that?
It is scary for sure, because I wondered if we had lost him at that point. But at the same time, I thrive on the pitch. I thrive on that creative pushback. And so the fact that he was engaged and he had an idea, and yet I could tell that he was interested in that we were bringing a kind of disruptor attitude to it. So what we did next is I rented an Airbnb in London, and I brought my team over, and we built a model in the studio that we created in this Airbnb. And then we went back for another meeting and said, hey, what about this? And that was the first time that he saw the idea of the kind of brick base coming out of the dock with this curvy roof, which the early sketch I did was the idea that that's the wave of blue fans washing over the banks of the Mersey. And he fell in love with that like instantly. And Robert Elstone's face, I could tell he was a bit nervous because Bill said, that's what we're going to do. And, of course we didn't know how much it was going to cost at the time, or it was just an idea, but it was an idea that brought what he cared about and what I had cared about, and it came together. And it's that collaboration, and that's where great architecture comes from.
Bill fell in love with that model.
That model.
As you'd fallen in love with the high school model in the Windsor
Interesting,
bakery.
Yeah, and it's true. We had our roof that you could open up. There's something really compelling about that.
There's something beautiful, the layers, but also like childishly seeing the thing as opposed to having to try and construct it mentally. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, it's about how you present it. But that was, I mean, it's such a stunning concept. The Mersey is the lifeblood of the city of Liverpool. It shaped the city in its greatest days. The state of it when I was growing up also reflected the city, a city on the
Sure.
downs. It is now proud and glorious again. How did you have that idea that the stadium would literally be as if the Mersey itself had gifted it back to the city?
I try and explain this a lot, that when I'm sketching, I very rarely draw what I think I'm going to draw. I tend to start to sketch and then I see it in there. And
Well, it's like your hand is doing it.
yeah,
like,
it's and then I recognize something in the sketch, and that was I had this idea that sort of brick walls, and then I did this swoop basically of the wave coming over, and that gave me that sort of basic shape.
it came from the subconscious.
Yeah, a bit,
It's, songwriters talk about this often. They do not know where the song comes from. It took 4 minutes for Noel to write "Don't Look Back in Anger" or whatever.
Right.
It just it's like a muse, a creative process that starts. Thank you, Big Rom. Thank you. Goes through your journey, the inputs. It was just genuinely, it comes from. Do you know where it comes from inside you?
I really don't. It does feel subconscious though. I've always loved the story that Michelangelo was competing for that piece of stone that he carved David from, and he talked about that he could see David in the stone, and he basically just let him out. That there was something in there, and that's how I always feel about that. That in those sketches, something's driving it. I mean, obviously, I've had a lot of input, but it feels, again, kind of magical because I don't mean to draw that necessarily. It just sort of comes out of that sketch.
God bless Michelangelo, proper blue, by the way. This process, I've said it 3 times now, started 10 years ago. You had to survive a global pandemic, periods of global conflict and darkness, 2 points deductions, and a 26-game stretch under Sam Allardyce. I mean, we also lost Bill Kenwright in October 2023.
Really tragic.
The club's former owner, Farhad Mashiri, along the way. He tried to sell the club to 777 partners, a deal that, thank God, failed. Although I will say, when ESPN do decide to make a 30 for 30 about it, it will be remarkable. Then in swooped the Freaking Group. How did this uncertainty in the boardroom affect the project? How much does it affect you personally and your own journey parallel?
It, of course, affected the project a lot. There were a lot of times where I thought the project could go away. I knew that there was a struggle, and they had made a bold decision to pick this site, and it was going to cost a lot more to build on this site than a normal building. So there were lots of things working against it just on a base level. And then when you have COVID and all the other things you mentioned, projects have gotten derailed for a lot less reasoning than this one went through. So and the struggles on the pitch, obviously, any relegation would have made a difference. And I found myself, interestingly, in talking to fans, becoming a kind of therapist for the fans. I wanted everybody to stay positive because I knew, just like what I said before about how it affects play on the pitch, it affects how the club's feeling about what they're investing and doing. And, I wanted everybody to just believe, because this is a club with a huge history. We're going to get past this. And, fortunately we did.
What was the low point for you?
Well, there was a point where we finished the stage 3 design, which is basically the development of the concept. And it was clearly going to go to design build to deliver the project. And all of a sudden I found out I wasn't part of that team. And that was a big blow. And it was literally when COVID started. I was in a meeting in Manchester with some Everton people to talk about what the next phase was going to look like. And I could tell they'd already made up their mind that we weren't going to be involved. And Trump was shutting down the airports because of COVID. And I thought maybe I would get stuck in Manchester for a while. I flew home thinking that I was done with this project, and it was definitely the low point. But Bill Kenwright ultimately believed in the value that I brought to the project, and he worked really hard to bring me back in and stay with it.
What do civilians not understand about the enormous task you've just lived? What's the hardest part of architecting an enormous stadium?
Well, it is that 10 years, so many things can happen in 10 years. Valued staff can decide to move on and do other things. Projects can get canceled. Budgets can spin out of control. Your own life can change. It really does take a lot of perseverance. And I often say it's just not for the faint of heart, these kind of projects. They really are like hold your breath to make it all work.
I loved watching you communicate constantly with Everton fans, as you say, not just locals, Goodison season ticket holders, L4 postcodes. But you really engaged Blues around the world. You shared your sketches online. You asked for input on all stages of the project. How did that input shape your perspectives, that quite singular feedback? Evertonians quite passionate. There's a saying in Brazil, everyone knows better than the Brazilian manager. 240 million experts. I think in Everton, every Evertonian is an elite architect.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a unique experience. And I don't know if it was part Everton and Evertonians. It was part where we were with social media at the time. I was fairly new to Twitter, hadn't had a lot of that experience, but it really, and I've often said this to owners, you may think you own this club, but I promise you there are a couple 100,000 people that will fix that for you. But there were some really robust conversations about the shape of the bowl, the seating bowl. Even using the word bowl got people, I had to explain that over and over. Just because I say bowl doesn't mean that it's round and shaped like the Olympic Stadium or something. So capacity was an issue. I was constantly having to explain why we try and right size the building and why not have one more seat than Anfield. And every one of those debates happened all the time. Yeah.
Was that the most constant comment?
Oh yeah, pretty much.
Have you thought about this, Dan?
Yeah, exactly.
About that.
Well, I'm sure if I checked Twitter right now, I'd have at least a couple of comments. Can we make it bigger? How are we going to expand it?
Are there any aspects and a detail in there that came directly from fan input?
Well, I think it was reinforcement of the idea that we don't care about, fancy cheese shop in the concourse. We want to be as close as we were at Goodison. It's got to be as noisy as we were at Goodison. And so that idea of steep and right on top of the pitch and the big home end, that was all reinforced by fans very early on.
I first saw the stadium when it was being built in 2024. David Moyes remarkably refused to go in there until Everton was safe from relegation, which I really admire. I found it deeply emotionally moving. I am from Liverpool. I can't overstate how remarkable it's been to witness this development build in the Dockland, once so proud. And then, when I grew up, it felt like the kind of place in a Scorsese movie you'd get rid of a body. Walking towards that stadium in that day, watching something that looked like it'd been pulled whole out of the Mersey. In your own words, how would you describe the vision that you've just made real? How do you describe this stadium?
So much of it is driven around what a unique site it was or is. I was really excited about the fact that it had been this historic UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it seemed to me that in some ways it was missing the point. You can't protect something just by not letting anything happen. Eventually it just falls into the Mersey, so that made no sense to me. It seemed like a development like this, particularly when the club could have built elsewhere, they were making a very bold choice to do this. And from an engineering perspective and architecture perspective, I knew it was all possible. It was just going to be expensive. But it was a commitment to doing something there that was not only going to be good for the club, it was going to change Liverpool. And it certainly has from that perspective. And I think the thing I'm most happy with is this idea that it feels like it grew up there. You see it peeking over the wall, and sure, it has this kind of modern roof and all of that, but there's something about it that feels like it's always been there, and yet it's new at the same time.
That's another aspect I found incredibly moving. It is so beautiful, the exterior, the way the heritage features of the dock were preserved and built into the design, the dock walls, some of the detail, even in the stonework, reflecting the history of the city. That contrast between modernity and the present is so moving. It's almost like the past of the city is fused with its future.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I can't take credit for all of that. That was everyone involved in the project was committed to that. From the landscape architects to the delivery architects. Lang O'Rourke, the contractor, did an incredible job in delivering this up against all of the challenges that you mentioned earlier. But all of those details, that was the thing. I think once anyone who was involved with this, they all also became Evertonians. They were doing something that was bigger than we were as a collective.
Yeah, I want to shout out one of my school friends who I grew up with, Pete Swift, who was an environmental architect, did the outside, a beautiful human being, did not become an Evertonian in the process, which pisses me off, but there's still time, Pete. One of your non-negotiables was that stand, making them as steep as possible. I'd say it's now famous They played one game there. It's already bloody famous. The South Stand, it is Sherpa steep with that 34.99 degree gradient. I think it's a pie crust away, possibly from the legal limit of 35 degrees. There's your vision. And then there's the challenge of executing it. Can you talk about the latter?
Sure. I mean, obviously, there are lots of great sort of home ends, and the yellow wall of Dortmund always gets talked about, again, because it does have an impact on the players. So that was there from the very early stages. And we had shown, I think, some early drawings comparing it to Anfield and comparing it to Goodison, obviously, and showing that this is going to be much bigger, much steeper.
Anfield +1.
Right. The one challenge that we realized in the development of the design was that to be able to provide safe standing in the lower stands right behind the goal, it was going to create a bit of a break. This is another thing that Everton Twitter just went crazy on me. Wait a minute, why is there a break in that big wall? It's supposed to be one big wall, just like Dortmund, but it's literally there to protect the sight lines behind the safe standing. So, in the end, I think we've got it finally painted blue, and it's not so noticeable. But it was such a stress for Evertonians for the longest time.
Are there any design ideas or concepts that you'd really hoped for, lobbied for, prayed for, that ultimately didn't get to be built?
Yeah.
There are things you have to give up along the way.
I have to say, and again, this is to the club's credit, to Langer Rourke's credit, that I feel like they've manifested what showed up in the renderings. It really is the design that I hoped that was in the models and the renderings. The one thing that I really wanted to do that we weren't able to do was I wanted to take the Archie Leach truss and put it in the building, because we thought Goodison would be taken down. And so I wanted to preserve that truss and put it across the face of the long bar on the south stand. Now that Goodison's going to remain, it makes sense that, but that was the one thing that I hoped for.
I know architects often try and bury a hidden signature into the design. Frank Lloyd Wright had his red tiles. When Donald Barthelme did the Texas Hall of State, he had the names, I love this, of notable Texans engraved in an order that would spell out his own last name, which is the most Ronaldo move of any architect that I've ever heard. Did you include any special Dan Meis kind of Easter eggs architecturally in the construction?
Well, it's funny. I've always joked about the fact that we should design 4 seats in the manifest that no one knows about, that we could just slip into, but we didn't do that. But the one thing that, and I did get asked this on Twitter, and I don't know how conscious I was of this, but the columns that support the big window on the south stand, the sort of V columns, I call them, it's something that came from a detail of a home I lived in Los Angeles. It was designed by a mid-century architect named Gregory Ain, and he would do these columns of these V columns, and it was kind of a googie, mid-century detail. And it's shown up in a few of my buildings, and there it is, right up front in Everton. And I don't know if I meant to do it, but it's there.
It's beautiful. Honestly, for 10 years, a little bit of Liverpool has been in California.
There you go.
Residing within your mind. You've buried a little bit of California in Liverpool.
A little bit. Yeah.
In a way, a lot of Liverpool feel that they are American. So when they hear that, they will love it. As you've loved Liverpool, you made over 30 trips during the phases of creativity and construction. I know a year ago, things started to become more real. I know you went to a lot of the test events during the spring. But that first Premier League match day in August, when Everton played their first real life Premier League game in that new home against Brighton and Hove Albion, you're actually at the pitch, at the Hill Dickinson, before the game, which is incredible for an architect to be given that kind of welcome by the Everton faithful. What did that feel like as you, after dreaming about it, imagining it, having been told that it was terrible, still persevering, building, creating, input, fans telling you, one bigger than, what are you doing, Dan? What are you doing? Suddenly it was real. The grass was under your feet. A ball was in the center circle. You looked up at the stands. You saw 52,000 people looking back to you. The roar from the supporters in that moment. What did that feel like in that instant?
Yeah, it is so overwhelming. It's hard to describe. And it's funny because I went to the last test event with the Roma friendly, and I worried a little bit because it was quiet. And the Roma fans knew what they were doing. They were making plenty of noise. And I've had this happen with other buildings, particularly when it's new. People are busy looking around. And of course, the match didn't matter to them. But I worried, is it too big? Are they too intimidated? But that day, for the Brighton game.
That was a real worry.
It was a very big
throwing
worry.
a party and you're like,
yeah. I've spent 10 years talking about how intimidating and loud this building was going to be. And here we were playing Roma and it was kind of quiet. And I thought, oh my God, and again, the Roma fans were really loud. So
was that this quiet leaving that day? Were you like, oh my God, what didn't that do?
Yeah.
Should have made it even steeper.
Yeah. Well, no, I just didn't. Well, I kept telling myself, I remember that the opening of Staples Center was similar, that people were just looking around. Even though the Lakers were there, they were sort of, this is all new. And so they didn't know yet how to really take in the building. So I told myself, it's just that first day kind of jitter. The Brighton game made it all go away. And when I was standing on the pitch, and I've never done that before, where I'm out in front of that many people, everyone focused on me. Hearing my voice on the PA, that was ridiculously crazy. It's easy for me to get emotional about it because it was 10 years and I've never just felt that kind of love back from, as if I really gave each one of them a gift in doing something that meant so much to me. You live your whole life, you focus your whole career and hope you have a taste of something like that. The biggest worry is I don't know that I'll ever feel it again. Like how do I ever do this again? It's truly unique.
Well, what does it feel like? We're tough people to impress, Liverpudlians. Yeah. We love to point out a criticism when we're able to. And you saw in the build-up, the test events, it was more than a little credit like we do with it, the transport, the match day experience.
Stairs, too many stairs.
Yeah. What was amazing to me about that match day, watching it, there was like a moment when it pivoted from that fear of there's going to be gripes, there's going to be a lot of complaints to just almost collectively, everyone realizing, it started honestly with the Brighton fans saying this is astonishing. And by the way, a number of them wrote, and Everton fans deserve it, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Really beautiful. But in a second, it pivoted to just an overwhelming sense of pride. This is us. We were a grand old club. We won things. We were state of the art. We love Goodison Park still. We're so proud of our history. But this is who we are now. And it pivoted in a second. Really, what did you hear from the fans? And what did it feel like? Can you put that into words?
Well, it's funny. For me, there were two things that really stood out. I was in one of the club spaces. I was walking out to the seating bowl, and one of the stewards, a woman, opened the door for me. And as I walked through the door, I heard her say to another one of the stewards, "He listened to us." And I thought, how incredible is that this is someone I don't know, and somehow she followed the process and now she's working in the building. And that's what she came away with, was that I listened to the fans.
He listened to us.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I could literally drop the mic and walk away from my career. That was the most amazing thing. The thing that felt like, okay, now the flip is switched, was Jack Grealish for me. Seeing the first time when he got that touch and how calm he was. And I tweeted about this, like, it's like watching a guy just out kicking the ball around on a Saturday. And I just felt all of a sudden everything has come together. It was a hard journey, but all of those things and these little bits that have all come together, it feels like we're on a different trajectory than certainly in the 10 years that I've been involved with the club.
Did you get any feedback from any of the players or the management?
I talked to Beto that day afterwards, and it was funny because, players have people coming up to him all the time. And I'm usually pretty shy about it. But we were standing together and I said, "Hey, Beto, I designed this." He said, "Really?" And, so his enthusiasm about it was different for me, because a lot of times players are pretty, I don't know what the right word is, but they're just sort of nonplussed about it. How big's my locker going to be? Or, something like that. It's $1 billion, but they care about how big their frickin' locker is going to be. So it was great because it was real enthusiasm from him, and he looked around and he had that kind of sparkle in his eyes. And again, I don't get a lot of that. Over the years, I've created some friendships with professional players, and because I'm interested in their perspective on the building. And so that was fun.
Yeah, he's a good one, Beto. He is my favorite. He does subscribe to Architectural Digest. He's more of a brutalist, concrete brutalist.
That's good.
That's
good.
That is proper Beto, proper brutalist. This moment was a moment, but it was 10 years in the making. Mm. You popped up on Instagram. It's BLUEtiful. This thing lived in your head for a long time. You're suddenly seeing it real. How did reality compare to what you've imagined, dreamt of, fought for?
It exceeded it, which is hard to do. There I was 10 years ago kind of imagining this being on the cover of the Echo. That was my big idea, that this building would be important. What I could never have imagined was the outpouring of love from the fans. And the idea that walking from the Titanic to the building and I'm getting stopped every 10 feet for selfies, that does not happen to architects, And I'm a guy from LA. I know what celebrity culture is like. Never have I experienced. And my friends who are architects would never believe it. That doesn't happen to architects. And it just shows how important this is to those fans.
Architects don't get to a status where they never need to pay for their own pie or beer in a town again. Is that what you're telling me?
Not like this. I don't think so. I mean, obviously there are famous architects and there are architects that can get recognized, but this was a sort of connection on another level.
Frank Gehry could never. Was there anything that surprised you? Was there a moment as you were standing there that even you were, wow, that's wild?
You mean about the building?
Yeah, I often talk to footballers and they talk about when Ilian died. Yeah. They talked about when he watches his goals back often. Yeah. He just laughs at them and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, because you can't imagine the scale, even though I've thought about it for 10 years and I did those early sketches, I'm sketching on a napkin or a sketchbook that's this big. And when you actually see that roof coming out of the brick and you think about all the things that have to get to actually building it, again, for me, I feel so spoiled because a whole bunch of people figured that out, like how they're actually going to lift that up with a crane and, bend that metal I can draw it in a few minutes, but it takes years to make that happen. So that's where I'm incredibly spoiled that it just happens.
What have you learned about yourself during this process? What did building the now named Hill Dickinson Stadium teach you about Dan Meis that you didn't know?
That it's not about another project for me, that there's something so emotional, so meaningful to do a building like this. Like, I'm so lucky I picked this building type for a career. I could build the world's tallest building and maybe a lot of people would recognize it, but they don't get emotional about it. Most people don't even really experience it. Here, it means so much to them, not even just when they're at the building. When they go to bed at night, they think about this place that their team plays, that it's their home. And all of that has affected me and will change how I work going forward. I will look for clients and projects where that's what they want and they recognize that is what is going to help the club move forward.
I mean, this is done. What happens to you now? You're talking about your job. You have this glory, this income generator that's in your life, creatively sustaining, economically sustaining. It's done.
Right.
You now have to chase down another one that can take years. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it does. And you hope that, what you've done, with the work that you've put out does define who you are. And so there will be other clubs like Everton that will think about either coming from a historic home or knowing what a new home could mean to them and taking their club forward. And that could be anywhere in the world. But I really hope that there's something that really does come through that we've captured about the history of English football that makes Hill Dickinson special, that hopefully will open doors for other projects. It's still going to be hard. I don't think I'm going to go run out and get a bunch of more tattoos. I'll still be an Evertonian, and I think I will always be able to bring those lessons forward and just hopefully find another club that cares about that as much as Everton did.
The football moment, Jack Grealish, that blur of shin pads and leg muscle, set up Ilian die. When that ball went in, did it feel like any other goal or did something about it?
No, that was so important. Obviously, seeing that first goal, that was when I knew the noise was there. Everything was fine and I knew that the game could still go one way or another, but all of that made it all worthwhile. And I knew everything was going to be okay. And I just watched Grealish do what he did. So I knew that wasn't going to be the last time I'd see that.
That noise will stay with you forever.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, it's in my head right now. I just can't imagine it. Again, how do I find the next one?
Dan, I've loved in this process getting to know you, getting to know your partner. I'm so grateful for everything you've done for the club. I do need to acknowledge in this 10-year period, there have been moments of challenge. I know that in January, you lost your home, like thousands of Angelinos during the devastating wildfires. I can't imagine what you and your family went through. I can't imagine what so many in Los Angeles went through. But that emotional juxtaposition between losing your own home at the very time you're about to give thousands of us Blues, hundreds of thousands of us around the world, a new home. How was that to live?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I'm not going to lie, it's been a challenging year because it is one of the biggest highs of my life and one of the biggest lows. The thing about the fire that, I've talked to other friends who lost their homes, it's really hard to articulate unless you've been through it. It's a surreal experience. And it's not just the loss of a home. I mean, for me, I lost 35 years of sketchbooks. All those original drawings of Everton that I was posting, all of it was in my studio and it's all gone. And there's sort of a minute where you don't even believe this is happening. And then a couple hours later, it's just all evaporated, And the crazy thing, going back, our Christmas tree was still sitting on the curb and my car had evaporated 20 feet away. It's so bizarre how vicious that fire was and how destructive it was, and all your things, your 40 years of history evaporates. So in some ways it's such a big thing that I don't know that I'll ever have felt like I've fully processed it. But my wife and I and my family, my daughter, we were all together, and thankfully we got our pets and ourselves out, and we're going to persevere. So having this high of Everton certainly helped with having that low, and we'll be okay.
What did it teach you about home, that notion of home, losing and giving?
Well, the one thing it taught me, and a bit like the stadium, is that it's not really the architecture. I wanted to say this so much when I was on the pitch that day and I forgot about it. I get so much attention for drawing this building, but that's not the stadium. It's the people, it's the fans, and all those 53,000, they're the stadium, and that's the home. And same way with my family, it's not the structure or the stuff. So wherever we are, you're my home. It's the Billy Joel song, right? That's a really true sentiment, and it was true with Everton as well.
It's a really beautiful note to end on. Last question for you, probably the most important one. Where's the Jack Grealish statue going to go, and how big is it going to be?
It's got to be really big, I think. Yeah, I know, and I feel a little embarrassed. I don't want to feel like I'm jumping on a bandwagon because I didn't pay much attention to him when he was certainly not at Man City, and I didn't know the Villa history very well either. But seeing him that day, I became an instant fan. And I think there's this moment where he's the right player at the right time for this club and the stadium that, God, it just, it makes getting up at 4 a.m. in LA so much more exciting. I can't wait to just see him again.
We're going to get that slab of marble that he's in already.
Yeah, that's right.
He's just in there.
We just let him out.
Let's get Michelangelo. Dan, it's been incredible listening to you. You are a remarkable human being. On behalf of every single Everton fan, thank you.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Courage.